Welcome to the Imperfect Activist, a new podcast on the Be the Change Media Network.
The Imperfect Activist talks all things youth activism, advocacy, and change-making. We address some of the most pressing environmental and social issues while reconciling with the challenges that come with growing up and transitioning into adulthood.
We shed light and face head-on the hot takes of youth activism and climate organising that are uncomfortable to discuss. This podcast will be a brave space where uncomfortable truths are learned and tricky questions are debated.
Because to become stronger, more united and more efficient as a demographic, we need to figure out what real solidarity looks like before we move forward to confront other societal issues with the urgency that is needed.
The Imperfect Activist follows the belief that we don't need 100 perfect activists, but millions of imperfect ones. Famous words by youth activist and environmentalist Clover Hogan. Meet your hosts.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Annabelle.
I'm Natasha, and we're excited to talk all things activism and organising with you, chatting with young change makers from across the globe.
We don't need 100 perfect activists, but millions of imperfect ones.
Young people, well, we're the future. We've got everything to fight for. In this fifth episode of The Imperfect Activist, Natasha talks to youth climate justice campaigner and journalist Scarlett Westbrook. Scarlett Westbrook is a leading youth climate justice activist and journalist, and is the youngest person in the world to attain an A-level in government and politics, which she self-taught at age 13. She's also the youngest parliamentary policy writer, most known for her work on climate education and being a lead organiser of the British school climate strikes. Together, they talk about growing up inside the UK climate movement, from school strikes to boardrooms, student-written climate bills to standing in Parliament. They reflect on what's changed in the years since young people filled the streets with Fridays for Future. Where are they now? Why has the movement's visibility shifted? And what does it cost the young people who are at the centre of it all?
Yeah, so hi Scarlett, thanks for coming on. So the first thing I'd love to ask you is, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a bit about how we know one another?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Scarlett Westbrook, I'm 20 years old, and I'm a climate justice activist from Birmingham. I think that we first met working on Teach the Future, is that right? So Teach the Future is a student-led campaign to reform the education system, to integrate climate education into every aspect of the education system, whilst also decarbonising it. And it's a campaign that I set up with my friend Jo Brindle in 2019. And I think that we both met whilst you were a volunteer on the campaign doing lots of amazing work.
Yeah, great. And I guess also we're both kind of first started activism within the kind of school strike movement. I guess I'm right in saying that. And that's kind of evolved a bit into Teach the Future. What first pulled you into climate activism, I guess? Was it the school strike movement? Was that your first start in activism, would you say? Or
I don't know. I think the first time that I sort of realised climate change was political was when I was in year 5. So I was 9 and we had a homework to read the news, which ended up being like revolutionary and life-changing for me, because when I was in year 5, it was 2014. So it was the year before the general election and also the Paris Convention. So when I did this homework, all of the news that I saw was about climate change and what the different politicians and parties were saying that they would do about it if they were elected. And up until this point, I'd always thought that climate change was like a scientific inevitability. I knew we could do things like turning off the lights and not using the tap when you're brushing your teeth to try and, make things a little bit better. But I didn't realise that political decisions could actually make a difference. And so off the back of that, I ended up canvassing for both the Labour and the Green parties. I was in year 6 later on. So I guess that was like my first foray into climate activism. But I didn't really do anything after that for a couple of years. I was quite into climate and quite into politics, and it was all that I'd ever talk about. But aside from occasional protests, I wasn't organising myself until the climate strike started in 2019.
Yeah. But you were still pretty young though when those first started. How old were you then?
I think I was 14.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I think I was 16. So yeah, which seems wild to think about that, isn't it? with
No, we
with
were so
babies.
young.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you kind of said a bit about kind of how you kind of first kind of interacted with the climate movement and kind of climate change. But is there anything else you want to add to that around like, was there a moment or event that kind of made you realize that this was something that you really cared about and that something you really like wanted to dedicate yourself to? This kind of issue of, well, climate justice.
Um, Yeah, so I think I had the like environmentalism and like climate change awareness from quite young because I was always really into science. I'm doing medicine at university now. I think when I really realized it was something I wanted to dedicate my life to almost was when I was doing my A level in politics. So when I was in year nine, when I was 13, I decided to self-teach myself an A level in government and politics.
Mm,
So the youngest person in the world to have that, which is
mm,
exciting. And when I did it, it was still modular. So I got to choose. Well, I don't think I was meant to choose, but because I was teaching myself, I kind of taught myself it wrong. But I
okay.
chose my modules. It was modular then. And I chose environment policy. What else did I do? Climate, environment policy, education policy, and then something called feminism and multiculturalism policy. And
Nice.
looking at that, I basically got to see how terrible we were at essentially all of those things. And I think that really made me realize just how almost dire the situation was. And also made me realize that there was like legislative capacity to change that. And I think those realizations joined up made me think that I actually want to do something about this and to do something about that now.
Yeah, great. That's yeah, wild. I guess it all started with kind of education and that kind of link there. So that's really interesting. What kind of work are you doing now then? Since it's been a few years now, I guess, since the school strike movement and since it kind of all kicked off globally for this kind of youth climate movement, as it were, since it kind of really started. Yeah, what are you doing now, and kind of what keeps you going? Is you're still calling yourself a climate activist, and you're still out there, fighting.
So I'm still doing quite a lot of work that's focused around legislation. So lots of policy pieces, particularly about climate education, public sector decarbonisation, and sort of energy and industrial strategy, which I really quite enjoy. A lot of that is with Teach the Future. I'm also writing a lot more about climate, particularly climate policy around the world. Reported on a couple of climate referendums, which has been exciting. I'm also doing quite a bit of local organising in the West Midlands, where I'm from, around like various different things that we have going on here, which I think is what like gives me hope to do other things. It's a lot easier to win at the grassroots, and you need the grassroots to be able to do those bigger things. I think if I was just doing like national level or international level climate activism, it would be so almost devoid of hope that I don't know if I'd be able to keep going. And then also lots of things about youth and young people and the intersections between being a young person and climate in the climate space and my interests. So things like theatre or medicine and health. So for example, one of the things I worked on was the People's Health Tribunal last year, which was really interesting.
Cool. Very exciting. Lots of different things. And it's interesting to see how you kind of evolved and maybe gone back to that kind of grassroots after kind of organising at such a national level. Yeah, that's so interesting. I guess thinking back to the school strike movement for a moment, what to you stands out the most from that era? Because it was pretty intense, like a couple of years, wasn't it? It was, yeah, pretty like non-stop for a couple of years for a lot of us organising within that. What kind of stands out for you looking back at that kind of period in your life?
I think a really big thing that stands out to me is how much unity we had built between different demographics of society. They were school strikes, but we also had workers strike with us. I remember at the September 20th strike, we had so many different so many different trade unions come and show up. I think the Bakerloo line striked with us. Loads of different workers joined us, people from all across the country. And actually, I think politicians were vaguely supportive. They didn't really do anything material with that support, but I do think that the political climate has changed so much between then and now. And when I look back at it, that's one of the things I think, the fact that the culture seemed overarchingly supportive of what we were doing, and we had made so many great connections there too. I also just think like how big the protests were and how exciting it was that every month they got bigger, because I think like the first one in Birmingham was like 30 people and it almost like tripled every time. That was so exciting. Also, like the friendships too. It was so stressful, like organizing these massive protests, but it was so fun too. Like just being on Zoom organizing calls that would run over for like an hour because you were just laughing so much.
Yeah, no, that's great. Do you think that that period kind of in history, I guess, changed how society or decision makers see young people, do you think?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I think I would say yes. I think that there are a lot more organizations, companies, institutions that now intentionally try to involve young people. And I also think before this happened, the most sort of youth representation you would have would be like a token young person on a panel. Whereas now I think that there are a lot more deliberate efforts to actually meaningfully incorporate young people, to have things that are completely young people led, and to actually like implement suggestions or change that have a real consequence, a real positive consequence in how young people are included.
Yeah, no, definitely, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I guess moving a little bit, it was, like I say, quite a big moment for us in the UK and I think globally. And definitely, like, we saw the rise of people like Greta Thunberg and these people that became kind of household names. And, you know, it made the headlines. You know, I remember seeing your name in all these big articles and things like that constantly. But I'd say right now, I guess 6 years on, it doesn't feel quite the same. So I wonder, from your perspective, someone, you know, as with a bit of journalism background, but also with this kind of background in the youth climate movement, why do you think that the youth climate movement doesn't make the headlines in the same way that it did back then now?
That's such a great question as well. And I think there
It's a
are
big
so
question.
different reasons for that. I think firstly, COVID took a lot of our momentum. We weren't as like we didn't use that many tactics really. The school strikes were our main one, and although we tried to translate them into an online version during COVID, it just didn't hit the same way. And I really do think we lost a lot of our momentum to COVID, not just because of the lack of diversity of protest tactics, but also because, you know, COVID did become the priority because so many people were dying. And I don't think that we established the connection between that and climate in a good enough way, and in a concerted enough way. But again, we were children. That's a big ask. That's not like a dig at anyone. I also think another thing is that I feel like things almost like I think the term it became so popular in the mainstream that it almost lost all of its meaning. I think some of that was because we didn't have enough of a cohesive political identity. People who participated in the climate strikes, if you sort of interviewed them, I think they would have all given a different reason for why they were there. They would all be perfectly valid reasons, but we did need more of a core identity there. And we did in UKSCM, the school strike movement, have 4 key demands that were around rapid decarbonisation and climate justice, but I don't know if that was overarching enough. Because of that, I feel like lots of people took the buzz around climate to just mean, oh, we need to be more aware of sustainability. And we ended up with like all of the massive corporations that contribute to the climate crisis having climate consultants and deciding to call that a day. Is that our fault? No, absolutely not. But I do think that how how corporate everything became like really also took away some of our momentum, because people instead put in stopgaps that are completely inadequate, realistically are not meaningful in any way to address climate change as a result of the momentum that it had. and decided to do nothing further, even though those steps were insignificant. I think a third thing is I really do think that the political culture that we have and like the media culture that we have has shifted to the right quite significantly. I also think politics in general, in sort of like the USA, countries like that, I do think things have shifted to the right. I also think that climate justice is a lot more of a known thing now than it was then. And we know that climate justice is just inherently, it's more political, it's more radical than, you know, just wanting to conserve the environment, which maybe some people interpreted our protests as being as then. So that's another big issue. And I think the fact that now we make so many more links between things more explicitly because we've learned how to, we're older, we've learned more things, we've got more experience. I think that's not something that this right-wing political and media culture wants to platform as much.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, definitely. The political landscape has definitely changed a lot, and yeah, maybe not always for the better, which probably plays a big part in it. But yeah, I mean, similarly, you've written for The Independent about Greta Thunberg's choice to sell an aid boat to Gaza. And Greta, like many youth activists and youth climate activists, have been very vocal on why we, the climate movement, must stand with Palestine. And in your words, why do you think Greta and many of us no longer get the same coverage in the media now that we're speaking up about Palestine, about Congo, about Sudan? Yeah, why do you think that is in your words?
I think one of the main reasons is because it can't be fit into like a nice little box as much as climate activism can. It was very easy, even though I don't think Greta's activism was depoliticized, but it's a lot easier to depoliticize something that you can spin as just being about conservation. You can't do that when it comes to, you know, the systematic killing of innocent civilians across the world that our governments contribute to. And I think it's more how it's more explicitly politicized. I think that's what's putting people off. We know that we're contributing to the situation in Palestine, Congo, and Sudan in numerous ways. And that isn't something that the media tends to platform. Even if we look at coverage, you know, like the sort of language that's used, it's always as if these things are just happening and not like something is these people are actually like doing things. Especially like coverage of Palestinians being killed, for example, it's always like they're just magically dying and not like they're actually being killed by Israel or by Israel's defense forces. Another thing as well is that like we're really seeing the rise of like far right narratives on social media too. And I would say in the media too, actually. I think reform get a lot of coverage these days. I think a lot of that is because it's so simple, right? Like, oh, you've got all of these problems. It's because of this random person on your street who's an immigrant. Really easy, identify the target, like really easy to just deport them and solve the problem, right? But with these wider systemic issues, wider issues like this, there's not as much of a simple, clear-cut solution. And I think that so much of our like media, just social and national media too, it's so like clickbaity and reactionary. I don't think it provokes thinking as much. It doesn't want to have things that are more complex and nuanced because that doesn't make a good headline. And I think this falls into that too.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree. I mean, yeah, I've just been feeling very frustrated at the moment about, Palestine, obviously, but also like the climate movement maybe not making that connection and not speaking up when they should be, because, you know, to me, the climate movement was about human rights, was about life. It was about, you know, having a livable future. And, you know, it's about human rights, climate justice, you know, and I don't think we should be separating the two. So, yeah, it's been inspiring seeing Greta recently, but lots of climate activists as well across the globe who aren't getting the same coverage as Greta lately. Not to put Greta, choosing her as an example, to put her on a pedestal, but yeah, so yeah, that's great.
I really think the tide has turned from where there was this broad consensus that we were doing the right thing, even if people didn't like 100% agree with us or whatever. There was a consensus. Climate change is bad. And we have to do something about this. Now it seems like we've gone completely the other way, where climate change is woke and doesn't exist. And literally, like every party is trying to strip back their climate commitments. It's literally a complete 180, and it's just so astronomical. I honestly, like, the political culture has changed so much. I don't think I would have believed this if you told me in 2019, like on the stage at the London protest, looking down at over 100,000 people, that in 6 years it would be a regular recurrence for major politicians leading our countries or leading our globe to be saying it doesn't even exist.
Yeah, I want to hold space for that heaviness, because I think it feels sometimes quite hard to comprehend that, right? Like, it feels like we've been working for so long, just kind of saying the same things since we were babies, like we were saying, really young, and like to be in this space now where it's quite scary politically for people to not even be acknowledging climate change and human rights. Yeah, but I guess holding that weight of that, I'd love to talk a bit about you personally, and maybe how activism has kind of taken a toll on you, kind of emotionally, physically, socially, and a bit about that, really, if you're willing to share a bit honestly about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been positives to this, like friendships and, like, relationships and good moments and things like that. There have also been a lot of negatives. It's a really heavy thing to hold, especially when climate strikes were happening and everything was framed around us, like, having to save the future and have, like, all this responsibility on us. It's incredibly stressful. And how you said how we spent so much time on this, that, like, something had to give. And when you're in school, I feel like that ended up being like your friendships, social things, like things you enjoyed. I remember like having, because I'm a dancer, I remember like writing one of my articles like whilst I was at dance and having to like leave my tap lesson early to like go do edits, like stuff like that, like not being able to go and see friends as much. And obviously that was a choice that we made. It was a choice I made, and a choice that I would have done again if it came down to it, because of how everything was then. And then also so many trolls as well. There's that too, which feel like that's a bit more insignificant. They can be quite funny. As I've gotten older, I've been appreciating how funny they are recently. And then also even things, within the movement, lots of, like, I guess if you put a couple hundred teenagers in one space, you're always going to get somewhat ideal outcomes.
Yeah.
So things like that too. You're just always tired. There's always so much to do. It can feel very like thankless. Not that you do this to be thanked, but when there's lots of like online trolls and things like that too, and it can be incredibly frustrating because it's a space where progress is very slow.
Yeah. It's not something that can be fixed overnight, is it? Unfortunately. And I feel like we kind of learned that the hard way, because obviously it feels like we kind of grew up, right, in this movement, and it's like when you're young, you're a bit naive because you're a bit like, we're going to do something about it. We're going to, and then you start to realize that actually you can't really solve it single-handedly overnight. But I do agree with you though. There's been like about community and connection, like there's been so much positives that have come with it, but I do think it's important to hold the weight of the other things as well, because I don't think that's often talked about. Like, I feel like it's often glamorized quite a lot, right? These young people that do all this amazing stuff, and it's like, actually, like, there's the other things that were sacrificed to do that. So yeah, I appreciate your honesty.
Thank you. It's also just weird having your younger self immortalized like that.
Yeah.
Especially like because I like work as a journalist. All of my political opinions since I was 14 are like just immortalized forever. And it's not like it's a diary entry or a social media post, it's in a national newspaper.
Yeah.
So I changed my mind. Or like,
wild.
some things that I wrote when I was in year 10, I don't 100% agree with them anymore.
Yeah.
They're just there.
Yeah. It's wild. Yeah.
Also, just like, for example, like joining university, I tried like really hard to separate the two sides of myself. So I don't want to have to always be on all the time. When we do this stuff, it's working. Like, this isn't just how we are. Well, to an extent, it's how we are always, but we don't always want to talk about climate change.
No. Yeah.
Or like brand or like personality is climate. That's all you're going to end up talking about if everybody knows about it.
Yeah, no, honestly, like I was the climate girl in school.
Me
Honestly.
too.
And it was like, what? Are we all the climate person? Anyway, yeah. And yeah, it's wild to think about. And I mean, I'm not on the same scale because I didn't really go into that journalism side of things, but you know, got mentioned in local media a lot during the school strike kind of era, and quite well in Devon, maybe some more kind of right-leaning media that said some maybe not nice things about me. Like, you can still Google me now, and that comes up, and that's a bit like, you know what I mean? Yeah, a bit. Oh, like
Local
having to
celeb, at what
live with
cost?
that. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I guess similarly, our podcast is called The Imperfect Activist. And yeah, it's about kind of just showing up in any way and kind of embracing the flaws, the doubts, those things that maybe the mistakes we maybe made along the way, things we maybe said that we don't agree with anymore, like you said, those kind of the nitty-gritty bits that kind of come with fighting for change. Because it's not all perfect. We're all just kind of trying our best. We don't know everything. But have you ever felt pressure to appear more kind of quote unquote perfect or professional than maybe you are, or to be taken seriously?
Yes, in so many ways. I'm from
Yeah.
Birmingham and I've lost my accent now, but I used to sound a lot more Brummy. And I think every organising call we ever had, everyone would make fun of my accent, for example, because it was quite strong. And I definitely like consciously made an effort to try and hide it. I wonder if that's why I sound so southern now. And I really wish I had a Brummy accent, so that's sad. It does get stronger if I talk to my family or if I'm angry. I feel like I did a radio interview recently, and I think you could really hear it then.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Or
Yeah.
like, I don't know how I like dressed, for example. I used to go in like full on like business formal at 14. I don't think I've worn a blazer in like 3 years now. So that's definitely changed. Because you can be professional and not have to like dress like a mini 40-year-old, you know? Like there is an in between. And I
Yeah.
don't think I discovered that before. So much like I guess we had to be in spaces so dominated by adults, there was a lot of pressure to act like them. I generally like don't think I've realized how to be a normal person my age until I was 19. Because I spent so much time with people older than me. I think I like just in my head that was who I was. But last year, like with university, I think I really realized actually no, I'm still a young person and I still like doing things that other young people do. And like it's those two things can coexist, and actually like being more true to that makes my opinion more worthy in a way, because it's more representative of like my demographic and things that we're all experiencing.
I'm so glad you said that actually about the like actually we are just young people at the end of the day, right? Like, and yeah, just remembering that, and like we don't have to be forced to kind of grow up just to kind of fit into these molds where we're kind of meant to be these experts on this thing, because we're just people that are just trying to do something about it, that are scared, really. I think that's what it boils down to for me. Yeah, and so yeah, I'm so glad you said that about we can just be young sometimes and just do what other young people do. I feel like that's important. And so yeah, and protecting your mental health in that way, because yeah, the next question actually I was going to ask you about, how do you protect your joy and your mental health in this kind of space? Yeah, I mean, you mentioned just kind of doing things that other young people do, but is there anything else that you like you have to do to kind of, I don't know, bring yourself back down to earth and kind of think about your mental health for a minute?
I think it's been really helpful for me to have a bit of a separation. It's really hard with this because I feel like lots of us do this professionally in a paid capacity, but we also organise and volunteer in our spare time on top of that in the same sphere, and all of our friends end up being from the same sphere too, because that's like what we spend most of our time on. So it's really hard to do things that aren't climate related, or to not constantly talk about that. So I think one thing for me is been trying to have more space between the two things, between the like activism-y climate stuff and between my actual life, and to try and be more like fun with myself, but actually doing other things too, like not cancelling things that I enjoy, or like seeing my friends, or I figure skate and dance, like still doing those things and still doing them like at the level that I want to, instead of them being the first thing to go when there's more stuff going on in like current affairs that we need to respond to. and also talking to people. One thing that is good about having like lots of friends from the climate space is you have lots of people who understand how you feel. And I think climate people are probably more willing to talk about how you're doing than most of your friends would be. So that's really helpful. And yeah, also just like on that same note too, like being young is sometimes very frustrating because so many annoying things about being young, but also good because it means there's lots of people older than you who have been there before and can give you advice in the things, which I also is really good. I think it's like reaching out for help when you need it, I think is really important. And also like making sure to see your normal friends too. That's something I've been having to try and do more intentionally the last couple of years, and it does make a difference to have people who aren't from the same space, just to make sure you're still existing in the normal world too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, that's a really nice one. Yeah. Kind of just thinking about looking ahead, really, like what gives you hope? And I feel like everybody asks this to us, so like you can take this in whatever way you want, but looking at the movement now, looking at kind of what you're involved in, what gives you kind of hope for the next few years in this kind of youth climate movement space?
Gives me hope. Okay, I think one thing that has given me hope has been the like political results of other countries. For example, in Ecuador in 2023, they voted to stop drilling in the Yusini, which is part of the Amazon in Ecuador. Accounts for 12% of all oil exports, and there was an overwhelming vote to stop drilling there, which I thought was amazing. Because that obviously is going to have a lot of implications for Ecuador. They're going to lose a lot of money, and they're still doing it. They're still like taking on the brunt of that because they believe in the greater good. I think that really big, amazing election result. You know, and there's other governments across the world who are also making great moves for climate too. Looking like, you know, closer to home, the UK paused all new oil fields, which is amazing. I think it's the first time that we're sort of seriously looking at the damage that, you know, drilling for oil does, and that's great that we've managed that for that to happen. I think that's great. There's also been, you know, like more ambitious climate policy than probably ever before here. So that's also exciting. And also just actually looking at the grassroots is always where I find my hope. So many local wins always going on, no matter like how far away they seem from us. They're not really that like distant. Not just here, but all across the world. And quite often from young people too, so many amazing student campaigns that really give me a lot of hope. And I think another thing that recently has been giving me hope when things are a bit more depressing has been how many people are still trying and still fighting what's right. I think that's quite lovely, you know, when it feels like so many people seem a bit heartless. There's also loads of people who aren't, who are risking everything to try and fight for what's right, or who are just always showing up. That's quite nice. And there'll always be people like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, that's a really nice one. Thank you. That's an awesome one. Yeah, I think I was actually saying something similar to someone the other day, actually, about like sometimes you think that no one's doing anything, but actually, if you look around and look at your neighbors and things like that, like actually people are doing a lot, and but in different ways, and maybe more grassroots level, like, you know, neighbors helping out food banks and things like that, like looking after one another, like mutual aid. I feel like that's activism as well, and it's like actually look around, I feel like there is people doing things and they're still trying, like you say. So yeah, that's really, really nice.
I was
Kind of
talking to my friend in Colombia yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, like I forgot that could be kind. You're so kind," and she was like, "You're just looking in the wrong place."
yeah,
It was so deep. It's so
yeah,
true.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you could go back and speak to your younger kind of activist self, maybe when you were canvassing or when you were striking school at 14, what would you say to her?
That my GCSEs are going to be cancelled, so to not revise. Because of COVID.
Yeah.
Use of my time. And I'd also tell myself I'm doing a good job. Like, launch a handle at what, like 14, 15, 16, to try and be more of a teenager as well as an activist. And also just to chill a bit. Yeah.
Mm,
Like, you need to
nice.
embrace the young part of being a young person, not just the activist part.
Oh, yeah, nice. I think that's a really good ending point because, yeah, I like to think that there might be some people listening that maybe are a bit new to kind of this idea of activism, quote unquote. And yeah, I think that's a really, really good one to end on. Just enjoying being young, and that feels important and feels like a big kind of theme of our conversation as well. Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to our first podcast of The Imperfect Activist. We'll be releasing episodes every other Friday, and you can get them wherever you get your podcasts through the Be the Change Media Network. You can also find us on Instagram at theimperfectactivist.podcast and on LinkedIn. Be sure to check out all the other amazing podcasts by young people on the Be the Change Media Network. Until next time, bye!
We don't need 100 perfect activists, but millions of imperfect ones.
Young people, well, we're the future. We've got everything to fight for.